So I was on earlier, so most of you know I'm called Adele Cutting and I run the audio outsourcing company Soundcuts. And with me today, we have Jon Youseman from Liquid Violet, Alastair Lindsay from Splash Damage, and Olly Johnson from Codemasters. I'm super excited. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, but I'm super excited about this panel because we're the not glamorous end of the pipeline, yet we're vitally important. So first of all, before we get onto that, if you could introduce yourself, Jon.
Hello, my name is Jon. I am the lead sound engineer at Liquid Violet Studios. We are an outsourcer. My career started in on-set special effects. Then I found my way through television and then into games as a recording engineer. And now as a lead sound engineer, I'm in a team that offers a wealth of creative solutions for dialogue production. So my personal credits include Valorant, Overwatch, Assassin's Creed, Call of Duty, and many more.
Brilliant. And Alastair, industry veteran.
Yes. Hi, I'm Alastair. I'm audio director at Splash Damage, and this is my 27th year in the industry, where I started as a composer, sound designer back in the dark ages. Spent 22 years at Sony PlayStation. So I've worked on a number of projects that have included dialogue, from The Getaway, the series, This Is Football. So lots of different types of dialogue and things. And last year I spent a year actually working with Jon and the team at Keyword Studios and Liquid Violet. So now I'm back in at Splash Damage. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you. And Olly.
So yeah, I've very similar path there. I've been at Codemasters for 19 years. Started off as a junior sound designer, speech editing, many files. Went on to lead projects as a sound designer, and then eventually just discovered that I really like the dialogue side of things. And sort of being in the industry for 19 years, you see the slow creep of dialogue becoming more and more important as titles get bigger. You know, even in sort of racing games, driving games, you know, we're constantly surprised at how much dialogue we put in them. So yeah, I'm there to kind of oversee that, along with a large team of people to just get, you know, one line of dialogue to play, which I think is hopefully what this one's about.
Great stuff. Yeah, so you've got writing, which is glamorous, and you've got the acting, which is glamorous. Everybody wants to be involved in the voiceover sessions. And then they expect it in game. And this is the bit in between that makes it sound good in game. So I just wanted to say, what are the biggest... Well, first of all, Alastair, why is this part of the pipeline so important?
Well, I mean, it's like anything. I mean, anyone who works in audio, especially with games, is used to being at the end of the chain, and I think the post-production is obviously the end of the chain in this dialogue pipeline. For me, that pipeline has to be, you know, tight all the way through and defined, and everybody has to know, because otherwise we're just going to get into a world of pain with time. There's just so much content in games. It's so different to any linear media. It's just unbelievable now, the amount of content we have. So time is a big expense. So, you know, it's human interacting, creating this stuff. So yeah, that's why everything has to be so tight, from the script, the recording, and just, we have to know what we're doing at the end of the chain. Otherwise you just don't want to get dumped a lot of Pro Tools sessions and go, what is this? You know, and that used to happen, but hopefully it's a lot easier now.
Jon, what excuse me, when we're talking about sort of like, you finish the recording session and you're given the data, what do you do? Where do you start? What's important to you that's done correctly at the recording stage that makes your life easier?
Things that make that kind of post-session kind of sort out a lot easier is having it all figured out before you go into session. Because if you go straight into session without a clear plan of somewhere you're going to end up, you often end up with with a very big unknown when you get to post-production. So for example, if you have a script that has like a limited set of lines, say that you've got 100 lines you want to record, and during the session, the director wants to go in all kinds of directions, doesn't have that clear kind of focus, and you might end up with alts for every line. When that comes to post-production, you end up with maybe 4 or 5 times the amount of physical audio to go through. So it's having that kind of clear direction from the start and knowing what where you want to end up and what your selects are, what your final outcome is going to be. That really makes it an easier process.
How do you, this is Ollie, but it's open to everybody. How do you work out how long it's going to take? So for example, you know, if we just take 100 lines with 4 variations each line, how much time do you estimate that would take? What time do you set aside? How do you budget?
Well, lines is very difficult. We normally go on words purely because a line can be, you know, a line could technically be someone going and, but a line could also be a monologue, right? So the first thing that we do is we kind of consider lines and word count, and then we kind of know sort of how many words we expect to record per hour, with breaks, with mistakes, with, you know, discussing an extra direction and things like that. So we normally sort of plan at about 1,000 words per hour for the types of games that we do. So that's like a non-narrative, it's very commentary based. We're normally working with say, for example, if we're recording Formula One, we're recording with someone like David Croft, who is out all year, obviously doing this thing, you know, around all the circuits. He's commentating. So he comes in and he doesn't make a mistake and he just completely smashes the whole thing out. It's very little direction. It's very hands off. I just press the button and away he goes. But to make sure we're making the most of his time, then yeah, it's critical to look at that in terms of lines and words.
So you mentioned file names, John, which is something that I'm slightly obsessive about. Because when you work on a game like, well, one of the big AAA games, you might have, you know, 200,000 lines of dialogue, which is UK. And then you have to do it in like eFigs, Russian, Chinese, Mandarin, and the whole rest. So you might have 16 other languages. How do you, what's important in the file naming convention? What sort of things, what sort of tips do any of you want to let the viewers know about file naming?
I think consistency is probably the number one. I think, and communication if there's been any updates. Because I think, because we can make adjustments and we can update everything that we've already got. Because often the projects we're working on are so vast that we may be working on them for months or even years. So if there's been any updates throughout the process, just communicate with us that's happened and we can make those changes. And often if things are temporary, if file names are temporary and they come through to us, there may be duplicates and stuff like that. And so having a nice open channel of communication means that we can go straight back to you and say, we've noticed this, what do you want to do? Because the last thing we want to do is try and make it up ourselves, because then that is that's not what anyone's going to be expecting to receive back.
Yeah, absolutely. Sanity checking those sort of things is really great. I mean, a lot of video game scripts are not written in, in like a, like for a movie script or something like that. They're written in Excel a lot of the time, or that's how it's delivered for us. So we can have like a line with file name, direction, game logic, things like that. What does it concatenate with anything else? And then within Excel, like in our file name column, we just simply have a formula that like red flags anything that has got a duplicate file name as soon as we accidentally type it. But consistency is definitely key, especially when you are dealing with multiple languages, whether you want to append it with something that indicates what language it is and then strip it out if you need to. We use some software called Alto, and that basically looks at all the different language folders that you've got, and make sure there's parity across the board, and also keeps them all separate as well, because there's nothing worse than a rogue file accidentally, you know, going amiss somewhere. You really don't want that to happen. So yeah, anything that you can do to keep things nice and separate, nice and clear, that at a glance you can see that it's in the right place, is a must.
I guess one thing from me, just following into that. So actually using something like Alto or some bespoke tools for dialogue asset management is so important, because you mentioned when you get to localized files, when, as you say, they often strip out the whatever language it is, because ultimately the system, once the audio, the dialogue is implemented into the game, whether it in WISE or Fmod, doesn't really, it's just a flick of a switch in the system or something, and it switches. So
Correct.
it has to all be the same file named, and it's all the asset management has to be able to do to be able to manage that. Otherwise, yeah, you're just going to get totally lost with it. So the system, yeah, like WISE or something, is pretty agnostic on what language you're using. It's just like whatever the system boots up, it will know exactly what to go to. So all the file names have to be the same, otherwise you're just duplicating work like 10 times.
Yeah. One of the, oh, sorry, just let me, I've got a croak. So one of the big things that's really hard to do with speech in games is obviously the leveling process. Because when you're recording in a studio, if somebody's shouting, they'll back off the mic, the engineer will turn it down slightly, and then they'll come forward and they'll speak normally. So when you've got that just for English, how do you go about making sure all the files work with relation to each other, so you don't get the sort of like bad example of some lines suddenly being really loud and close, and sometimes they're really far away? How do you do that? And then multiply that by 16 different languages.
Well, they always have the English as a reference, and whatever notes hopefully will be in the script to say how that's directed. So that, yeah, so the actors always have to, the foreign actors can always reference the English files for how it's delivered. Otherwise, yeah, you wouldn't, it would be all over the place if they didn't have that.
Any specific tools that you use to make sure all things are leveled?
If they've been recorded and delivered right, I guess there's a few tools like that. I don't know, I've never used Alto, but I know, Jon, you use something that does basically loudness matches, analyzes the source language like English, and then
yeah, that's right.
It can level all the other languages to it, or show the frequencies, and you can kind of then change them. But it has to be recorded and delivered correctly in the first place. Otherwise, it's, you know, if you level a quiet whisper to make it sound like a shout, it's just going to be very noisy.
But how do you do that? Do you literally have to go through every single file?
No. It's an automated process. There's tools to do this.
But on the English version,
will you
get the base ones you're matching everything to?
Yes, yeah. The English would be that once you've got that locked in and that's all correct, that would be the reference. That it would be, the tool would analyze the loudness and a number of other parameters, and yeah, then it would reference, then it would match the foreign languages, and you know, it would could do things like match and see if the lengths are the same, and if there's any discrepancies, it would like highlight things and say, why is this one like twice the length, and you could then go in and investigate. So there's a bit of automation, then there's some manual work to tweak things, but there's a number of, I mean, a lot of studios, when I was at Sony, we had some bespoke tools that were written for this, and yeah, there's some off-the-shelf tools, but all kind of do a similar thing, really.
We're pretty much the same. So we use like a lot of concatenated phrases. So for example, in F1, we actually give you timing information in concatenated phrases. So it'd be like, that lap was a 1:32.9. All those are different. It's very much talking clock, but a lot better because it's a professional voice actor. And we make sure that all sounds great in the studio. There's a lot of techniques that we use to make sure that that sounds correct all the way through. But then once we get that into the game, if all of a sudden the levels are a little bit all over the place and the lead-in line is a little bit louder than the concatenated line, then you've definitely got a problem. So one of the things that we do is we use Reaper, and then in that you can actually sort of analyze the loudness there and sort of, you know, and then sort of get them all the correct power, you know, the correct loudness, so that they all sound, as you go through them all, they all sound loud. So none are going to sort of jump out. And it's just as important with a very long session. Obviously, a great engineer is going to sort of keep an ear on the levels and how things sound. But even with like a normal level where it's normal sort of spoken volume, there may be the odd discrepancy here and there, and that just sort of smooths it all out. But it's definitely the last bit of the chain. But also, I just kind of like to say really that, you know, these are conversations that we have early on with like the sound designer, the programmer, and all sorts of people, just to make sure that going into recording sessions and what we're expected, you know, is this going to be a shouted line? Is this going to be spoken? What's the background going to be like? What's the sound design going to be like? How's it going to sit within the music? So definitely it's a collaboration with the sound department as well, and the you know, creative sound designers and all sorts, to get, you know, to make sure that it all sits in the sound bed.
Great stuff. So when you're actually, you've got the session, you've got a whole massive WAV file, and you're going through, it's not just a case of just chopping out the start and the stop of the speech, is it? It's not just a case of, they say one line of dialogue and you edit the start and you edit the end, and that's the job done. What are you doing? What's the art in speech editing?
Get someone else to do it. It's a massive job. It's a huge job.
Well, that's what we do. we take it from you. I think the key is to make it sound like you've done nothing. I think it is the one thing that there's no remedy for is a bad performance. So as long as you've got a good performance, you want to keep as much of that as possible. So you need to make sure you hit that tech spec, as Olly's saying, so you're in the correct loudness. Everything's going to sound fine, but still sounds honest to the original delivery, because that's ultimately the goal, right? That's what everyone wants to relate to. And with the same, as we were saying about consistency before, in kind of levels and engineering, keeping track of through a recording session, we may be recording lines that are next to each other in a conversation, but the engineer records them a month apart from each other in the studio. So having that consistency across the board from a post-production perspective, making sure everything is balanced, it's compressed, so it's tucked, and the average loudness is in the right place, means that wherever you are in the game, and no matter when those lines were physically recorded by the actor, they all bounce off each other and they all sound like a part of the same conversation.
So there's things that having done this process, there's things I'm very aware of when I'm directing sessions. Things like if there's too much lip sound or sticky mouth sound in the actor, because I know if I deliver that to the sound cuts team to edit, they'll be like, Adele, why the hell didn't you make them eat an apple? Because that is a nightmare to edit.
Yeah.
So, and things like popping and things like that, making sure that they're not popping on the mic, because things like that, although there's fixes, it's tricky, isn't it? And it just adds a lot of time on this. So what sort of things do you use to get rid of pops and clicks and things like that?
There's a lot of good plugins out there that will do a good job, but the most important thing is you listen to what the plugin's actually doing, because often if you go in with even just a 1% too heavy hand with these stuff, it will bring in artifacts, and it will really as I said, it will take away from the performance. You'll start to listen to something else, not what the actor's been saying. So we go through and we hand edit everything. So we use spectral editing. So we'll go through and we'll auto heal and we'll draw over all of those clicks, those minor problems. If there's any major problems like those big plosives and stuff, the engineer I hope they will pick it up in session and make sure it's all covered. They are fixable, of course, if it's like the perfect take and it's like a really emotive line that's killing their voice, and we just have to take it because it's gonna damage the actor if we go again. There's stuff we can do, but it's always we'd rather get a clean performance that everyone's happy with, that we don't have to do much to, then work it through in post loads.
So with like with RX, that's something personally I have an issue with, in the fact that I feel a lot of people see RX as like, yeah, solve all your problems with RX, just slap it on. So I really love the fact that you said you've got to listen to it, because I think it's important that people learn to hand edit first without using the tricks, because then they really truly understand and start listening, and then they can start using the tools, because then they understand and they can hear things like the artifacts and things like that. It's not a case of just one, but press a button, job done, is it?
Yeah. No, definitely not. I think there is a place for automation and batch processing files when you're talking about levels and analysis more than anything, so you can see where files sit. But in terms of that fine editing, it has to be done by ear. It just has to. There has to be someone sitting and listening to it before they can make those decisions, because otherwise they're just making it off site or guesswork. They're not using their ears to make an informed decision.
And how do you guys feel about breaths?
Depends on the game. I mean, for us, like we've just, with our last game that we've done, we recorded kind of fake podcasts. And this is interesting actually, because I don't know if anybody's edited a podcast, but people have preferences of whether you can hear that the podcasters are alive by breathing or not. So yeah, it depends on the game. And for us with the commentary stuff, we feel it's necessary because it feels live, but maybe for some narration stuff where it maybe detracts a little bit. So I guess for us it depends on that's a bit of a wishy-washy answer actually, but it definitely for us depends on the tone of the game and what the performance demands.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, especially if it's a narrative story game, you want that kind of emotion and life into it. So, but yeah, if it's just reading a book or it's a narration, it wants to be just to the facts, doesn't it? It just doesn't want that life. It wants to deliver the information. It depends what the end purpose is. Yeah, whether it's telling a story, whether it's giving you information or what.
No, totally. I think a lot of emotion can be done in a breath, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Because I think I'm always slightly obsessed with breaths as well, just because when I was taught at film school, I was always taught to take them all out. And when I started in games, it was take them all out. And I really love a breath.
Yeah,
so
same.
I really like leaving them in. So I wondered what you guys were thinking about that. Moving on, what's the worst project you've ever worked on in terms? You don't have to say the project.
I still work at the company. I can't say.
But in terms of, what was the worst project in terms of organisation? What went wrong? What made it bad so that people don't do that?
Staying out this one.
I mean, I was thinking of an example earlier on, and I'm not going to say the game and that, but it was a long time ago. So I think things are hopefully different and better now. But back in the olden days, should we say, I don't think people knew what they were doing. So for me, it was whoever's writing the script and dealing with this kind of thing and hiring actors, they see somebody or hear somebody and think, oh, they've got a good voice, but actually they can't act. But thinking someone's got a good voice and then they can give a performance, you put someone in front of a mic and then they're just like, it can't deliver it. So there was one game a long time ago, and it was just lots and lots of going through lots of different actors. Well, they weren't even actors; they were just people who had quite interesting voices, but who couldn't even speak once the microphone was there. So it was just really, really painful, slow process. It took a lot of time. Deleting sessions, not using them, getting new people, and it was just, there was no planning, there was just no organization, and it was just very painful.
Anybody else got a bad project?
Not necessarily bad project, but just pitfalls really that we can all learn from. Like I said before, when we're considering games are global, people play them all over the world. We've got to make sure that the localization isn't just like a direct translation of files, that it's good, it's localized, it means something to somebody in Spain as it does in England or the US or wherever it's going to be. So what I would say is that really early on, consider that for every line you write, you're going to get 9, 10, 18 lines back in localized language. And to make sure that you're ready for that, because it's a huge amount of dialogue to process. It's a huge amount of dialogue to organize, and just make sure that there's things that you can do really early on. We do a lot with dev speech, with robo speech, making sure everything's filled out and kind of working in the game before a professional actor even steps foot in the studio. I'll be in our vocal booth doing terrible lines, or we'll get the robo voice in alto to do it, just to make sure that things are working. Because actually, when you get your dialogue back, you kind of just want to put it in the game and hear it, because you've not got long. If you're planning on, say, like 10% of your entire script may need to have a pickup session, then realistically, how long have you got to figure out what you need to pick up? You don't want to waste that valuable time. You can do a lot of that quite early on. And when, in terms of stuff that you can do before, and I'm sure you've spoken about this already today, but it's things like how dialogue can be fatiguing to listen to, and that actually sort of how much telemetry you can get for all the hours of the game that people have played in the studio. How many lines are playing? You're walking through a village and the villager says, "Watch out for my chickens," and he said it 5 times in a row on 6 different consoles. You must know that actually we need to record more of these lines, or we need to reduce the chance of it playing to make sure that our game sounds good, so that you're actually making them the best use of time and the best bang for your buck from your actor once they're in the studio, that they're doing enough of the lines that you need and a few of the lines that you don't really need. And you don't really know that until you've got stuff and you can hear it in the game. So I would say that there's a lot you can do before an actor steps in the studio, for sure.
Yeah, I think to build on that point someone raised earlier was to get the scripts in advance of the session. I think that's a really, really important point, not just for because last minute rewrites are inevitable. There's going to be people working on this script right up until it goes into the studio just to get it the best it is. But to share it with us early, so we, even though it's not perfect, so the actor can at least see what's going on and they can get a feel for that world. You're just going to get a better performance in studio. I can't emphasize how important that is. That it's if the actor's on board and they know what they're doing and they're comfortable, that start, as you said, that 10 minutes, they're comfortable before they come in, and then when you get that personal rapport with them as well, they're ready to hit the ground running rather than having to work that out during the session. You just get a better use of your time. Absolutely.
I'm quite surprised. I mean, because I've been working in isolation for 19 years, working at Codemasters and the way that we do things. So I'm very surprised at the lack of information that people get. We like people to know about the project that we're working on. We like to sit there and when we send a casting thing out and when we cast, we'll send them too much information about their character just so they can really take it in what they're supposed to play, even if it's just a commentator, commentating on a fake race. It's just, you've got a backstory. Here's who you are. We'll bring them into the studio. We'll sit them down. We'll tell them everything we can about the game, all the stuff they need to know, the stuff they don't need to know, because we feel like they're part of this game. They're going to be in the credits. Their name's going to be on it. And we want them to be as excited about performing in this game as we are making it. So I think that's really important, and I'm quite surprised that doesn't really happen in other places. We choose our actors, and we really, really always super thrilled to have them on board and take them on studio tours and all sorts, just to make sure that because we record in the studio, so we always just give them a tour and sort of get them hyped and interested in what we're doing, even if they don't particularly like motorsport or whatever. By the time we record in, everyone's ready to go and happy. I think that comes across.
Cool. There's because we talked a lot about, obviously things have to be organized in the recording session, so that it makes our lives at the end with the editing and the processing a lot smoother. Have you ever had, well, who's responsible for when lines change in the session? So I might direct something and the actor might say, I think it might be better if we did it like this, or can we change that? That's difficult to say. And we'll update the line. How does that translate into your part of the process? What happens if you get the script and it's not the right line? What problems does that cause?
We always make sure that we record the line as written to make sure that there's that option there. And often we will go off script, and we'll just make sure that either we create a new cell with a new line, or we have a column next to it for alt takes, which one that we're going to choose. And then, you know, ultimately when we get it back, hopefully there's not too many of them, but we can mark down which one we think's best. And if we do need to use the original line, then we've still got it. I would always try and record as written, and then, you know, an alt take if it feels like, you know, you really want to have that for safety.
Yeah, I think as we work as an external editing team, and sometimes we won't have had anything to do with the sessions, we'll just be doing the editing. It's quite hard for us when we do get a script and the script does not match what's been recorded, because then it puts in our head, is this right? Have I got the right files? Where is it? Am I missing it? And can spend hours searching for it. So what do you think best practice is in that situation?
So a general sort of Codemasters recording session would have myself, I normally direct, and then we'll have an engineer who's basically, their only job is to really, you know, monitor the desk, get everything right. And then we'll have somebody else there who's taking notes. Choosing, you know, I'll be discussing with them, they'll be typing as quickly as they can with the new lines. I mean, it does help that our lines generally are quite short and succinct, and it's all commentary based. But we definitely like to have someone who's really keen and on the ball with writing notes, because often the very next week we're sending that as recorded script off to our localization department, because it needs to move fast once you've got all the files. So yeah, definitely would, you know, you need somebody in there sort of taking those notes and adding the changed lines in there.
Yeah. Have you ever had any problems with, because in a voiceover session you'll have, you know, wild dialogue recordings, and then you'll have time restricted where it has to start and stop at a specific time. Sound sync, which is where the words have to be in the same place. And then you've got lip sync, which is obviously the most technical version of them all. Have you ever had any problems dealing with all those different formats coming in?
Anyone?
We probably be well placed to answer that. Yeah, I think that the way that's organised and kept organised for post is definitely in the session. I think it would depend. It's definitely down to the engineer to make sure that translates well to post. I think for lip sync, I work backwards. Yeah, the lip sync stuff, it's always in the session. You got to be able to make a confident ballpark call on whether it will make it to lip sync, and then that'll either happen if we have the time. We'll work on that more in session, or we'll send that out of session, and someone can really go over it with picture in post to make sure it lines up perfectly. In terms of the word sync and time sync, if you consolidate your select to the same time as the reference region, then you're normally just sorted from there. So there's a couple of very simple methods, just smart things to do. I've scripted a load of keyboard shortcuts that will do that whole process very quickly. So it's really easy for the engineer to stay on top and stay up to date with that whole process while still carrying on with recording.
And so what's your best project you've ever worked on? Alastair, you've worked on millions of projects. There must be one where everything works so well. And why was it so good?
Well, on the dialogue front, I got out of that a long time ago, to be honest. I think
I love editing speech. I don't know why you don't.
Actually, no. So interesting. When the last few years at Sony, we were involved in a lot of the bigger titles coming from the US, so Spider-Man, but interestingly, it was just pure post. It was like mastering the dialogue and things like that. So they were the kind of last few that I touched. But actually, myself doing it, it's a long time a long time ago, really, because it's just not. Yeah, I got burnt too much. So
have any of you had much experience editing mocap recordings or full performance capture recordings? Because that's a different kettle of fish to editing stuff that's recorded in a studio.
I think the first one that I worked on was the Getaway and Getaway Black Monday. That's all performance capture with cameras, so it's facial capture, and that was what, 16, 17 plus years ago. And that was pretty tricky. So you got your Pro Tools sessions with the videos in there, and you're having to, when they're editing, and I mean, it's a vague memory now, but I remember there was some tricky, it's all time code and this kind of stuff, and it's just like, well, yeah, it was a bit like flying with the seat of your pants. We didn't kind of know what we were doing. It was just, this is all new stuff. But
absolutely, that's where you really need to go in knowing what the end result is going to be. The time code, what you're going to be working to, what you're filming at, what you're going to be editing at, because that could be a different frame rate, for example, to what you shoot at. So if you get your time code back, it all kind of needs to sync every step of the way. So that's definitely something to be aware of, and something that we did on F1 2019, where we were doing a mocap shoot at Pinewood, and we got our audio guys there to handle all the time code and make sure all that was completely in sync with the performance, and that made sure that we were pretty smooth when it came to editing, just to make sure that we had our techie guys there on the scene to make sure it was all smooth.
Did you look like you were about to say something, John, and then everybody started speaking? Did you have
No. I haven't had too much experience dealing with mocap stuff. Only a few performance capture in studio, plenty of that, and I really enjoy working in that kind of environment, because it's just that extra dynamic. It's not just about the voice.
Sorry, Alastair.
I was going to say, I think those sessions, the performance capture sessions, are often the ones that go a little bit wild and a bit like the script changes quite quickly, whereas I think something like a commentary is probably a little bit more rigid. But yeah, I remember sessions where it's like, especially the actors, they're just getting into it, really kind of getting into their character, and just like, let's try this, and kind of goes back to your point earlier. If that doesn't get documented, you're just like, well, what's this? What's happening?
Yeah.
And then then it may not fit a scene, and then it just starts to go a little bit wild. But yeah, they're definitely interesting sessions, those performance capture ones.
Yeah, I find them because obviously when you're editing a piece of speech and it's been recorded in a booth, if you want to edit out a click, you can just edit out that click. You can delete it, or change the overall length of the file. But obviously with mocap, as you were saying, Olly, everything is totally linked. So if you've got that click, you can't nip that out.
No, you have to more like mask it.
Yeah, because it's got to stay the same length. And also you've got other problems like foot noise all over it if they're running around, and body noise, and it takes speech editing to a whole different level of detail.
That's why our set was a very noisy pit lane in a Formula One circuit. Always set your scenes in very noisy environments.
So we're going to be finishing up soon. So I just want to go through, if each of you could give one pearl of wisdom to the audience about this process and what needs to be done, whether it's something you could include in your file naming convention or something you need to think about before you go into editing. Let's do that. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, I'm going to just reiterate my first comment, really. It's just having a solid pipeline, a plan, and everybody who's involved in the process is informed. Even if it's the chap at the end editing, they need to be involved, just so everything is defined, and you know what the end goal is, and everybody knows what the end goal is. So yeah, that's it's pretty common sense.
Yeah, I would second that, definitely. I think if I was to say anything else other than that, yeah, communication is definitely the thing, definitely key to the whole thing. But you can fix a lot in post, but you cannot fix a bad performance. So anything that you can do to make the recording stage as good, as fluent as possible, then you're going to get better results in post.
Ollie, your pearl of wisdom.
Yeah, it's the same thing. A lot of people, colleagues, take the mick out of me saying that all I do is push a button in the studio, but 90% of the work is done before I push it. That goes for file names and just collaborating and talking with your colleagues and making sure that you're getting the things that you need. Form a good relationship with the programmer as well. Sort of, if you're on the dev side of things, how long things are going to take to implement as well. Make sure that you've got the time to hook all this dialogue up as well. It's really important. You don't want to waste these things. But yeah, I think just being super organized and getting as much detail in your initial script as you can. Direction, logic, like character, actor, file paths, formats. You can always hide a column. You can always hide it, and definitely sort of format things so that you can easily see duplicate files. You just want to catch as many things before the final files go in.
I think that's important to sort of like state, because I know a lot of actors are fine with reading Excel documents, but lots of actors aren't. And it's important, I think, for actors to realise how Excel documents almost become a religion in the games industry, because it contains so much information for every other discipline. That's why they get an Excel spreadsheet. It's not because we don't like them.
Yeah, and a lot of the time, like, it's really useful for a voice actor to see the game logic behind it. Like, if it's there, what's this line all about? Well, this is if you're in first place, but second place is about a second behind you, so they could overtake. It's that changes everything. So sometimes the logic is really important as well as the direction to be able to refer back to. So I would say, it is to have that to hand as well.
Yeah, I think as long as they've got information that they need, like stage direction, I think it's also interesting that actors get to see what they're reacting off. I think the worst case scenario is when an actor goes into the studio and it's an Excel export, which is just their lines, without anybody else's, because then they don't know what on earth they're doing. I'm going to leave a tip as well, and I think my big tip is in file naming conventions, you have the person who's speaking, obviously, as part of the file name, but I also think it's really good to have the person who they're speaking to as part of the file name, because that helps with localization later on down the line. So has anybody got any more points before I hand back to Sam and Ed? No?
Good.
I think we're good.
Well, I'm glad we sorted that out. Thanks, guys. Thank you. No, it was absolutely fascinating, and just from the simple actor's point of view and how we can make your life a bit easier and complain less about things. So thank you for joining us. Yeah, great stuff. Ed, are you there? No, Ed's gone quiet. Okay, so that's a good sign, isn't it? So
I'm lurking.
Oh, you're lurking. Okay, I thought you died because you're the one with the big button, and we're going to wrap up. So
That's true.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated today, and to you, dear viewers, especially for staying with us for the full 4 hours of Game Voices Connect today. Woohoo! I think that setting the tone across so many disciplines today has opened us up to future single sessions that won't be 4 hours long, but might be maybe 2 hours long on a specific topic. I don't know about you, but I've learned so much today. And as I said at the top, we're making games for the world. So if you didn't see yourself represented on the panel today, please get in touch with us via Twitter @game_voices. So huge thank you, screams, claps, proposals of marriage to our panelists and performers, Mike Bithell, Sally Beaumont, Andy Walsh, Dave Gilbert, Kirsty Gilmore, John Paul Sutherland, Olly Johnson, Adele Cutting, Amelia Tyler, Alastair Lindsay, and Jon Youseman. And of course, Ed Stern is the reason you can see us all today. Thank you, Ed, so much. This wouldn't have looked or sounded like this without, you know, your help and your input. Appreciate you, man.
That's enough of that nonsense.
So yes, hope to join you again in the future. There's a lot of ideas kicking around in my head, and certainly in the minds of the panelists. Let's hope this is the beginning of great things. And again, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.